For the sake of time, so we can really have our two great guests share their perspectives and leave ample time for questions, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So today we're so excited to bring the provider perspective to inform our Pay for Success in Higher Education national cohort. Our cohort has been working to employ Pay for Success as a mechanism to support increased college enrollment, persistence, and graduation outcomes. And we're extremely grateful to the Kresge Foundation for funding this work to support students, especially to Bethany Miller and Caroline Altman-Smith. We're also grateful for the time and thoughtful perspective of our two guest presenters, uAspire and College Forward, who you will hear from today. So our purpose today is to share the approaches of, Our purpose today is to share the approaches of two organizations in scaling college access and success service models and advancing student outcomes. We'll hear some lessons learned from uAspire's Pay for Success feasibility study in 2017 and from College Forward's Pay for Success launched pilot, which came to a close earlier this year. Finally, we aim to create a space for our Pay for Success in Higher Education national cohort sites to ask questions directly to providers as we prepare for our in-person convening time at the National College Access Network Conference in September. In terms of an agenda, I'll introduce our sites and today's presenters before uAspire and College Forward speak more about their experience, and we'll leave 15 minutes at the end for questions, really seeing this as a conversation and a space to create that conversation. So our Pay for Success cohort training and technical assistance has spanned 4 systems of higher education and higher education institutions across the country. I just wanted to give our site attendees on the phone a chance to quickly introduce yourselves with your name and your title, and I'll go from site to site. So from Connecticut State Colleges and Universities, who do we have on today? Great. That would be Ben Barnes and his team from Connecticut State Colleges and Universities. Next, from the Ohio Department of Higher Education, do we have anyone on?
Yeah, both Stephanie Davidson and Brett Visker. I'm Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, and Brett is?
Associate Vice Chancellor, Institutional and Collaboration and Completion.
Wonderful, and we're so happy to have you on. From the Colorado Department of Higher Education, we also have quite a full team. I think I saw Cynthia on.
Yep, this is Cynthia with the Department of Higher Education, and I am the Program Director for COSI. And I'm not sure, I think we're missing a few members. We have a CEO meeting here in the office, so that took away a few of our members today.
That's okay. Thank you for introducing yourself, and we'll be recording this, so I will send out a recording at the end, and you're welcome to share it with anyone who couldn't make it today. Finally, from the Arizona State University, do we have Sylvia or Anita on?
Good morning. This is Sylvia Simons with ASU, and I'm joined by my colleagues Anita Verdugo Tarango and Lorenzo Chavez.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves, and really excited to be working with such diverse stakeholders and partners from across the country. So we've been using these 6 feasibility work streams to develop a project hypothesis for the past 3 months. And we'll utilize these work streams as key inputs to the tools and resources that will ultimately support Pay for Success pilot projects. So last week, we shared more about the ways Pay for Success can specifically address student needs and barriers for each site's priority student population. And we're really excited for this webinar to build on that student support services work stream outlined in light blue here.
On your computer, just not translating.
In terms of an introduction, we know providers are executing the day-to-day work of supporting students and constantly innovating how to reach more students and impact more lives. And we really feel that they're best set up to speak to student support services. So I'm thrilled to introduce you to the providers who will be sharing more about who they are, their experience with Pay for Success, and the provider view on successful and collaborative pay-for-success partnerships today. From uAspire, I'm delighted to introduce Jermaine Myrene, the Chief External Affairs Officer. Jermaine has been with uAspire since January 2017, and he's on the road right now, so you may hear from him during the question and answer session. Michelle Murphy is the Director of Business Development at uAspire in Boston, where she cultivates opportunities for new partnerships that bring uAspire services to students and practitioners from across the country. Prior to this, Michelle was the Senior Director of Virtual Student Support at uAspire, a role in which she oversaw 2 national programs that scaled virtual advising to tens of thousands of students. From College Forward, I'm thrilled that Austin Buchan, CEO of College Forward in Austin, Texas, can share his voice today. Since joining in 2010, Austin has redefined College Forward's vision to bring intensive coaching services to every underserved student in Texas. He's established long-term partnerships with college and university leaders to build sustainable coaching programs for first-generation, low-income college students. Again, we at Third Sector are so grateful to Jermaine, Michelle, and Austin for your time. And with that, I would love to hand it off to Michelle to share more about uAspire's Pay for Success exploration.
Great. Thanks, Joanna. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can.
Excellent. Let me know if you hear any rustling because I'm on an iPhone with the cord situation. So if you hear any rustling, I can lift my mic up. Thanks for the introduction. So my name is Michelle. I am with uAspire, just as Joanna said, Director of Biz Dev, and my colleague Jermaine is joining us on the line and in the midst of travel. So thanks, Jermaine, for making the time while you are going from airport to airport. I'll go ahead and kick us off. So some background about who uAspire is. We are a national nonprofit. We are laser focused on college affordability. So we work with students, practitioners, and with other organizations and change agents to ensure that all young people have the financial information and resources necessary to find an affordable path to and through college. Go ahead and advance the slide, Joanna, and I can get into some more of the context. We find the urgency of college affordability to be especially, pressing for the students that we want to serve. Some, fast facts on the slide here that I think are quite familiar to all of us on the call. We know that a college graduate is more likely to be employed, to earn a higher income over their lifetime, and we also know that the graduation rates and success rates in college for students who are from lower income families really presents a tremendous challenge. And so it's why we focus on affordability. We believe that the problem for a lot of students is quite complex, but we put our stake in the ground that if we can remove some of these financial barriers and give them a bit more empowerment and support and resources, that we can start to remove some real barriers and see some positive effects for those students. So to summarize the nature of the issue, we know over on the left-hand side, you have sort of like the 2 tangible, generally universal constraints that our students face. College is expensive and securing financing for it is difficult. And over on the right, I think the elements of the problem that are more nuanced to the individual and to the community that they might be from. So the effects of carrying around a student loan for decades and what that can sort of send ripple effects into a student's life, and also the inequity of access to support. So students from a city like Boston who might attend a Boston public school find themselves sort of inundated with folks who want to help them find a path to college, but we know that that's not true across the city of Boston, certainly not between cities, and then not nationally across our different regions. Go ahead and advance the slide, thanks. So uAspire's solution is we work on 3 different fronts to mitigate some of these college affordability challenges. We do direct advising with students. That'll be sort of the focus of the services that I'll cover today. We also train practitioners, so that's school counselors and other college access providers. so that they might better serve their students within the scope of the kind of counseling and advising work they might be doing. And then we also work at the policy level and with higher ed partners and partners in state and federal government to try to enact some system level change to sort of remove some of the barriers that I think are pretty pernicious that our students face. So I'll work from the macro to the micro and back into the thing that is most relevant for our conversation today. So our policy and systems change work has 3 major areas of focus. So that's what you can see up on the slides in the bullets. We work to simplify financial aid systems. So that includes FAFSA simplification and also fixing sort of the verification process and trajectory that impacts students. Award letter transparency. So we've recently published a paper with New America to decode the cost of college and articulate some of the challenges and insights and also propose solutions about how to make award letters more transparent. We also, this is not up on the slide, but we did a consultation project with Colorado State University a couple of years ago to lend some of those best practices to their award letters at the institutional level. And then we also work on true cost of college and degree completion, and I think that's in the same realm of clarifying the information for students, not just around financial aid that they are receiving, but also the cost of attending an institution to better contextualize the aid that they are getting. So that's policy and systems change. Our practitioner training focuses on training counselors. We have 5 core content areas that make up our training offerings. So 3 of them are up on the slide. We do college affordability planning, FAFSA completion, and award letter review are sort of our most popular courses. And then we also offer a student aid report verification and some summer transition. I think addressing summer melt and the bridging that summer between high school graduation and that first year of college is something that I'll talk a bit about when we get into our advising slides, but is also something we're seeing come up from practitioners as well, and is a course that we offer that is drawing more and more interest on the high school side in particular. Hit the slide, Joanna. Thank you. Okay, so our student advising is our direct service program that I'll spend most of the time talking about today and was the focus of the feasibility study that we did with Third Sector a couple of years ago. We offer in-person and virtual advising to students across several years. So our texting can begin as early as 11th grade, and then we work with students intensely from senior year of high school into their first and second year of college. We have a curriculum that we sort of built over 35 years or so on how to work with students individually so that they might have the kind of coaching and support that they need to not only apply for their financial aid awards, but then follow all of the procedures that they will need to secure those awards, to get award letters that reflect the aid that they're eligible for, and then how to maintain that award over time. So that really gets into, I think, what will be most relevant for us today, which is that bridge from summer into the first year of college. And then we continue to work with students in their first and second year of college to make sure that they're doing things like making satisfactory academic progress, which certainly relates to financial aid because it is a big requirement for maintaining those awards over time. And I'll get a little bit more into the feasibility study itself, but I think it's worth naming that this continuum is an area where we drew a lot of insights from the feasibility study that we did a few years ago. We thought of our programming as its best iteration when it is in a continuum. So when we begin in high school with students and stay with them through that second year of post-secondary. And I think one of the big insights that really forced us to think about how we can build a model that could be applied in different contexts, and it's certainly in partnership with an HEI, was thinking about different enrollment pathways. So Traditionally, we served post-secondary students that we also served in high school, and I think we've moved away from that. And in fact, our New York City site is a site in which we put to the test an enrollment pathway in which we do not serve the student in high school, but we begin serving them after high school. So we do our summer bridge programming to connect them to college and then encourage their process from there for the first 2 years. Next slide, please. So looking at our impact, we are tremendously proud of the progress we're making with our students. We target students in communities where we're going to find high proportions of students from low-income households, high proportions of students who are the first in their family to attend college. And we can see that our students sort of beat the national average in terms of both enrollment and persistence. And I'll say, like, I think a big focus of ours, the reason why we focus so, I think, strenuously on persistence up to now is firstly because that's how far our programming goes. So we really want to look at persistence as a check on the effectiveness of our program, since our program goes through that second year of post-secondary. But also it gives us, I think, a great program evaluation indicator of how well we're able to move students from the summer after high school into their first year of college and then subsequently into their second year. We have our eye on graduation rates for sure, but I think because the standard for those is 4 and 6 years, I think it would give us a much slower feedback loop to get an indication of how well we're able to move students from year to year. Next slide, please. So in terms of national reach, I think this was a big motivator also for participating in the feasibility study. So we are committed to serving 3 million low and moderate income students and getting them on that affordable path to and through college by 2022. And we recognize that partnership is essential for making that happen. So we have our programming in different iterations. We've done some national virtual advising pilots. We have some intensive on-the-ground operations in New York and Massachusetts and the Bay Area of California, and we do training on a national scale. And so we're committed to, I think, having this level of footprint, and so with that are really open to working with partners and certainly HEIs and state-level systems about where there might be some natural alignment in the work that uAspire does relative to the goals in those different geographies. Next slide, please. So getting into the feasibility study, certainly something we were, not only for our scale and for what we were learning really quickly about our advising, specifically our virtual advising. So a lot of our programming for post-secondary students was born out of our summer melt work. So we were seeing our high school graduates melting off at the same rate, or comparable anyway, to that of the city of Boston overall. And so we really sparked this intentional research-based approach to how to ameliorate our own summer melt rate. And from that, I think our virtual advising programming really stood out as a high impact intervention, and also something that worked really well once our students were in college. So we serve them in high school a lot of the times, and then they go anywhere. So a lot of our students will stay in state, but not necessarily in the Boston area. And so I think our virtual advising was showing great promise for us being able to maintain our relationships with our students, encourage their progress, get them through all of the steps they needed to take to maintain their financial aid over time and stay eligible for it. And so that was, I think, a major contributing factor to our engagement in the feasibility study, was to examine to what extent there was an ecosystem for that kind of work at the time in Massachusetts. So that's sort of that first bullet there. We had a lot of questions about who could ultimately be the right end payer. We were thinking at the time of our program as a full spectrum, high school to college. And as I sort of alluded to earlier, I think the findings from the study really challenged our thinking on that and brought us to new places. The study provided an avenue to explore a more formalized partnerships with HEIs, And again, the promising findings from our RCTs really gave us some ideas about how we could work together and work alongside the colleges where our students were attending. Next slide, please. So in terms of insights from the study, the way I've structured the slide is to sort of name what the insight was and then thinking through, what would need to be true in a future state to formalize a partnership with an HEI, particularly in a PFS context. So we were thrilled to find at the end of the feasibility study sort of confirmation on our hypothesis that there would be a lot of natural alignment between uAspire, so our mission, the students that we want to serve, the way in which we want to serve them, that focus on affordability and sort of removing logistical barriers. And I think we found a lot of alignment with the HEIs in Massachusetts that were part of the study. I think what would need to be true for a future PFS project would to be on the due diligence side at the outset, so in the early phases of planning to really pinpoint students to be served. I think, getting quite exacting about which subpopulations of students were a priority for the partner, and to what extent uAspire could leverage our own programming to meet the needs of those students and to do so in concert with whatever resources were available on campus with whatever specific goals that the partner might want to have relative to those students. So that was a big one. The second one I spoke to earlier, having a more flexible enrollment pathway. So at the time, we really thought of our program as a fixed continuum, and I think what would need to be true and a change that we've rolled out as of last January, we have post-secondary advising programming now that doesn't require the high school component. It really, I think, has given us a lot of enthusiasm for partnership because I think that's where the collaboration with our partners. In New York, it's with College Bound Initiative, which is part of the Student Leadership Network, but a CBO, effectively, that does college access work. So we're excited at the possibility of testing that sort of warm handoff at the college level as well. Another big insight, by design, a PFS would establish outcome measures and an evaluation plan that would be reminiscent of the rigor of the RCTs that we had done for Summermount. So it was helpful to really draw that distinction. I think we are always, measuring. We track student progress in Salesforce. We share data back and forth with our partners. But the additional rigor, I think, was something that really stood out to us from the study. And so what would need to be true in a future PFS project would be to ensure that the outcomes reflect the potential for impact for our services. And the big metrics there would be, of course, enrollment, persistence, and student engagement with the intervention. That's a great indicator about whether or not students are picking up what we're putting down. Are they uptaking the services that we're putting out there? Because that helps, I think, focus the picture for impact down the line. And lastly, I think data access and sharing really unlocks program impact. That certainly came up in the feasibility study as well. I think what we need to be true is to just really do our due diligence and have a strong data sharing agreement with our partners in place to set up the intervention. And I'm thinking student level data inclusive of both information about their enrollment. So we need to know if a student is enrolled part-time, for instance, to be able to serve them with intention, and their financial aid data. The things we could do if we knew from the college who has been selected for verification rather than have to text students individually to ask them if they have been selected in order to identify them and then begin to target them with counseling from there. Yeah, next slide, please. So to summarize, I think with these insights in mind, I think a future PFS project would certainly be shaped by uAspire's unique approach to virtual advising. We have a strong research base that informs our practice. We have a track record of working successfully with post-secondary students in a variety of geographies and in communities, and students who are themselves different pursuing different academic programs of varying levels of academic strength. And I think we're able to build those relationships really well and move the needle on some of the progress that they need to make along our curriculum and our milestones. Certainly a commitment from partners, through data sharing and of course collaboration to develop sort of the appropriate structures to ensure that service delivery is successful and that the interventions are sort of applied as designed. I think a lot of the true nature of when the rubber meets the road is that there's a bit of iteration, and I think having a strong HEI partner to help us manage that iteration so we still get the outcomes we're seeking, I think would be a tremendous win, and certainly it would need to be true characteristic. And then lastly, I think having a touchstone on campus, I think this gets at some of those structures. We have found that even though we don't have data sharing agreements currently with our higher ed partners, we've built relationships with folks on campus, and that makes all the difference. So that's certainly something that we'd love to preserve and carry forward, and not presume that having a data sharing agreement sort of lessens the need for that strong partner, and in particular that sort of champion on campus to help ensure that our services, integrate really well with what's being offered to students. And so with that, I will close myself out and thank you all very much for your time. It's wonderful to be here and to sort of share our insights and our findings, and to hear from you all as well.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing more about your pay for success explorations, and excited to hear from you more in the question and answer. At this time, I'd like to pass it over to Austin to share more about College Forward's launched Pay for Success project.
Wonderful. It is such a pleasure to be with you guys, and to be in great company, allies who are all working diligently on what I think to be the most important mission of our generation, and helping level the playing field for our most underserved students. So it is just a pleasure to be among friends and thought partners, and just honored to be at the table with y'all, the virtual table. I'm not going to spend too much time kind of centralizing on the why. I think Michelle, you did a fantastic job just talking about why this work is so critical from the student perspective. Just to add a personal flair to this, I'll just say that from my own personal story, I've seen the power of what a college degree can mean, and what the absence of it can mean too. So my mom's side of the family, very much low income, rural, southern part of Texas. Literally no one in her family has ever completed a college degree. I was the first on that side of the family to walk the stage. And conversely, my dad has about 3 generations of college degrees stretching all the way back, I think, to his great-grandfather. And watching the trajectories of those lives and what that meant as a pathway out of poverty is real. It's not an abstraction, I think, for me, and certainly for, I'm sure, a lot of the folks on this call. So that is the really underlying why behind everything. As we're getting into the weeds about the technicalities and some of the lessons that we've learned on our Pay for Success journey, that I think grounds the work. So again, a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Third Sector, to our good friends at uAspire, and our shared partners at the Kresge Foundation, who also helped ignite our first round of really programming in the higher ed space. So pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to share. I think I can cover most of my content in about 14 minutes. So I think we'll have even more time at the end here for Q&A, which is what I'm most excited about. So a little bit of backstory. I'm not going to spend too much time going into the details of College Forward, but at a high level, we are an Austin, Texas-based nonprofit. We've been around about 17 years. And whereas uAspire, as we just heard, really focuses in for great reasons on that financial aid and affordability part of the problem, think of College Forward more as a generalist. We are the air traffic controllers across the college access, so that first step of supporting high school students into college, and then making sure those students have a continuity of support all the way through the finish line, whether that's a 1-year, 2-year, or 4-year degree, and into their first job. We deploy our model by using near-peer coaches. So we have a team of about 100 full-time employees who are working with a caseload of students. And you can almost think of us as a exclusively focused student support service department at a higher ed institution. Our one and only job, to oversimplify slightly our work, is to help our students navigate a very complicated system, both tactically with paperwork and FAFSA and verification and registering for classes and everything in between, and also the softer side. We know that one of the biggest predictors, just in talking with students who don't complete their journey, is that feeling of being an imposter on their campus. They don't belong here for any number of reasons, and helping mitigate that and being our students' biggest cheerleaders and fans on the sideline as they're making their way through a degree. That's really the core of our work. Obviously, there's a lot of rigor behind our curriculum and our approach that we do with our direct outreach to students. And we're also undergirded with a really powerful data system that helps us layer in predictive analytics and recommended case management solutions as students are individually making their way through this process, which, you know, once you've worked with one student, you've worked with one student, and helping us be smart about mitigating some of those challenges. In the context of our Pay for Success model, a little bit of backstory here is that College Forward, similar to uAspire, initially focused on helping bridge that gap from high school to college. We realized that that was really just the start of the problem. The real issue is increasing persistence in graduation once they arrive. So we have really turned the focus of the organization to almost exclusively focus on that part of the problem. We are still supporting about 7,000 students a year through a really direct and intensive coaching model. About 6,000 of those students, just to give you a breakdown, are currently enrolled in college. So understanding that part of the pipeline has become our obsession, especially over the past 5 years. And as part of that, from more of a strategic lens, it's kind of interesting that we've approached Pay for Success as a direct service provider, whereas y'all are coming more from the agency and institutional perspective, but arriving at a similar conclusion, which is that in order to really change at population level scale the problem we're trying to solve, growing a small, relatively small direct service nonprofit simply is not the long-term solution. We have to figure out ways for colleges, for high schools, for other systems to embed better support services for their students to get them to and through. And that really informed our logic and our strategy. How can we take what we know to be working from our peers like uAspire, from ourselves, and embed that within the systems at scale? So I bring that up because as you'll all be thinking about your long-term vision about what does the institution look like before and after this project, our answer to that was essentially, let's let College Forward come onto our campus through a tight partnership with a higher ed institution, maybe in a training wheels approach, do the heavy lifting of working with a cohort of students, prove our efficacy, make the case that this is a better way of building out support services, and then tiptoe out the back over a 3 to 5 year runway. And so that was really the governing underlying why, or what we were working toward. And that model and that vision we had and the strategy was what informed our Pay for Success project. And like I said, I would love to be corrected on this, but I think that we are still, or were about 4 or 5 years ago, the first ever Pay for Success implementation in the country as it relates to higher education, with a direct service provider providing the sorts of support. So what we built was really pioneering and offered a blueprint, and this is why I'm so thrilled to be here. We got a lot of things right in our design, and we got a lot of things wrong. And so as I'm walking through this, not just in this webinar, but continuing throughout your work, however I can be a resource to help prevent stepping in the same potholes that we might have, I'm here for that as well. So I really want to just dive into this and talk about some of the lessons that we did learn, just to maybe plant a few seeds as you're thinking. In this next slide, you'll see there's a lot of boxes, a lot of arrows. Don't spend too much time looking at this. It is a little bit more into the weeds than we want to get into today. But this gives you a general breakdown of how we constructed our Pay for Success partnership. 4 real critical players. Our investor, who in this case was the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. College Forward, of course, who is the service provider. The college, who in our case is the outcome payer, right? They're the end payer of all this work in our model. And we had a fiscal agent who was a quasi-fourth player, but I think the most important next player was really our evaluator. So having a third-party objective pair of eyes, in this case was Dr. Ben Castleman out of UVA, who's done some great work with both uAspire and College Forward over the years, to run an RCT, randomized controlled trial in the background to monitor our efficacy and just, again, provide that objective third-party validation or lack of validation of the impact we were creating. As we were thinking about this, and again, not going to get into the granular mechanics of everything right now, but the basic issues that we were trying to resolve through the structure were really helping mitigate risk for our end payer. So again, in this case, it's the college. In many cases, colleges don't have that financial, just out-of-pocket resource to invest in a service provider like us. But even if they do, they might also be married with a level of risk tolerance of thinking, well, wait a second, we don't know if College Forward really is going to work. Can we get someone to help mitigate that risk before we make a significant investment in this new way of doing work? And that's where the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation stepped in to help cover those upfront costs and those upfront risks. So that was the general structure that we built. And I want to give just a very quick, 1-minute overview of the structure because it does inform many of the lessons that we learned along the way. So Jenny, you can go to the next slide, which is even more detail I'm not going to get into, but please do reference this at your convenience or as helpful. This just looks at really the different terms. We heard Michelle talking about those data sharing agreements. So all of those really granular levels behind these boxes that help make this work flow. You can see I kind of went straight into the weeds with a lot of this, but this is not to be a turnoff to the concept, but it is an important theme that this is a lot of hard and detailed work in thinking about how you structure your partnerships. And I hope that some of the resources we've built can help you on that journey a little bit quicker. So let's go ahead and just jump straight in, next slide please, on some of the key wins that we experienced. At the end of the day, what we were narrowly focused on was helping our institutional partners. We had to zoom in and scope the project to really say, our goal in the short term is to increase fall 1 to fall 2 persistence rates. So the cohort of students, if we're working with 100 students, we want to see a significant uptick in the number of those 100 who are returning for their subsequent sophomore year. And hopefully that will be above the baseline target that we set. If that was true, right, we can prove our point and we can unlock some of this pay for success tool. So in our first year and first implementation of this, first and foremost, we had a partner. Again, as someone we didn't have a blueprint for this or wasn't a roadmap, just getting a college partner to do this with us was a major victory. It required a lot of trust on their part. It required a lot of work on ours to come to the table together and do this. And we pulled it off. We implemented it, and we ran that program for 3 years together. I think obviously most importantly, we proved that what we did worked. We had about an 80% return rate for that first cohort of students, which was above their baseline and historical average. Again, of course, this is the most important thing. If we weren't demonstrating results, these conversations would have gone very differently. So that was, I think, ultimately the most important piece. Number 3, we called this partnership model success partnerships, just some vernacular there. We actually, at the end of the day, remember I talked about us wanting, our real motivation was to embed and instill kind of a movement within the institution and then leave. Well, part of that leaving process, in this case, involved the college hiring initially just 1, but then eventually 3 of our full-time staff to come over as salaried employees within the institution. This may or may not be something of interest for your service providers, depending on who you end up working with. For us, this was a major victory. It helped us protect that quality of service and that culture of student support that we wanted to leave behind, and no better way to do that than to have our own human beings lift off from our payroll and shift over to the colleges. So this was a major victory for us. 4th is really this orientation around a culture of data. I think a lot of colleges, well, not a lot, most colleges have pretty strong data systems in place to help them evaluate. But in our experience, most institutions were what we would call data rich, but information poor. And I think that with this partnership, both we grew as a service provider and our sophistication, and I like to think we injected a new sense of rigor and sophistication in our partner colleges' data management and information as it relates to student success. So that was really big. I think the other kind of no-brainer here is that we were pioneering alongside one of our foundation supporters who had been with us for a long time, innovating together, building together, and doing that with a college partner in the room, I think helped manifest some really strong and different types of relationships and trust with all those little boxes on the flow chart. Those are real human beings behind those things. And being able to do that in a real, I think, friendly environment that was honest, open, and transparent as we were learning and pioneering in this space, I think was a huge victory for us. And then I somewhat jokingly put in this last point that I don't think anything in the history of this college partner has been more rigorously evaluated in terms of our dollar and penny cent investment with these support programs relative to student success. We are under a microscope from the institution's perspective, and that's exactly where we wanted to be. We wanted to look and see what was working, have this third-party evaluator come through and run a really sophisticated evaluation for us. And so that in and of itself, I think was a great win as well. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about some of the key lessons that we learned. In our case, again, we came at this from a slightly different perspective than y'all are, but we were entering into basically a fee-for-service arrangement with the college. So obviously, all of the stuff that we did, all the stuff y'all are getting ready to do will have new costs associated with it. And we all know how important money is to this equation. We're all driven by the mission. At the end of the day, if we're not providing a cost-effective or efficient model, that's a huge issue. So even though our price point per student, which is how we denominated our cost, is one of the lowest in the country, it still was too much for a lot of colleges to invest and to figure out how they could self-sustain, which really I think added a sense of urgency on College Boards and to drive that down as much as we could without watering down our services. So it held our feet to the fire in being more efficient and effective with our resources and to be, of course, more sympathetic to some of the real financial constraints our college partners had. Lesson number 2 is thinking about that first year. In our case, this is just part of our model. We did ask for some investment from the college, but that was still sometimes a struggle because of the way that our institution's budgets work. We'll talk about this maybe in Q&A, but being able to build a system that can withstand potential budget cuts at the state level, that was a huge piece that cropped up somewhat unexpectedly. There was a threat of a 10% budget cut to higher ed institutions in Texas. That ended up not happening, but it did stir up some fear. And figuring out how you can build a model that can withstand those sorts of unexpected changes outside of our control. Number 3 is figuring out, again, this might be inherent to our model, we really wanted to institutionalize and scale out our service model within the institution. And that really requires a level of buy-in and enthusiasm across the entire system. And I think that this is something that will definitely be applied for you and your partnerships. And my big recommendation is we have a saying of president or bust, which basically meant we had to have the highest level of support right out of the gate, or we knew this was going to be deprioritized or have the risk of being deprioritized or perceived as just another thing on someone's plate. And so as you're thinking about this, as you're building these models, number 1, the earlier you can engage your partners in this work and the design, the better. And also, as you're going live with a partnership, I think it's critical, this is what we got wrong a little bit, we had so much emphasis on the president and senior leadership of the institution, but it's critical to build in buy-in and enthusiasm from the ground level staff at your partner institutions all the way up and down the org chart. And so that just allows for preservation, for excitement, for unpeaking of really important issues that might crop up, and building just a level of enthusiasm for this new work that's coming. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I'll skip that last point for now. And I think we've hit most of these pieces here, but you can see as you're going through this maybe after the webinar, I talked about those issues, and then on the right-hand side, that really helped inform. This wasn't a bad thing. We came in with our eyes open saying we're going to learn a lot in this first year. On this yellow version of that same chart, we have some of the new structure and designs that we started to layer in to help mitigate some of those issues. So again, I would really encourage everyone to think about, number 1, go into this knowing that your first year is, as with anything, going to be a year of learning. And it needs to be iterative, as Michelle talked about. This is not something I'll try to combat, is this black and white thinking, this light switch thinking that if it doesn't immediately prove results after 1 semester of work, then we have to pull the plug. And I want to offset that because that can sometimes come when you're doing RCTs or really rigorous evaluations. These things need time. People are the biggest driver of this work, and that requires trust and relationships. And the better you do that work, and if you go into it with a mindset of learning and creativity and co-learning across all the different players, I think you'll be really set up for success in the work. Next slide, please. I think we might be at the end. So I think those are all the main points, and look at that. We have 14 minutes left for questions, not 15. But I'll pause there, and I just want to, again, say thank you to our friends at uAspire and Third Sector. Happy to answer questions now or in the future on any of this work.
Great, thank you so much, Austin. So at this time, I would love to open it up for any questions that any of our partner sites may have. and really create a space for that kind of open conversation that doesn't have to end today, but I'm hoping the next 15 minutes can be just the start of thinking about any questions you may have that the provider perspective could inform. So feel free to jump in with any questions and unmute yourself.
Hello, this is Cynthia with Colorado, and thank you both for sharing about your programs. It's really exciting to hear what other programs are doing around the country and how a lot of times we align, especially in the persistence and completion work. But I do have a couple questions. One for both of you in terms of, are you only serving traditional age students, or are you currently doing any programming for non-traditional or thinking of moving in that direction? And then, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask two questions. And then for uAspire specifically, where are the students transitioned after those 2 years of support at the post-secondary level?
I'll jump in since it's a two-parter. So the answer to your first question, Cynthia, great question. I would characterize uAspire's perspective as very open in terms of ages of students that we are serving. We have traditionally served students who are coming straight from high school and into college. I think there is some intentionality there because we're building sort of off on the momentum from high school. I think there's also some historical tradition on our end because we have traditionally served students who were our own high school advisees. And it's historically our post-secondary programming has been a continuation of our high school programming. I think with this, particularly with the way we're approaching our work in New York by thinking more flexibly and nimbly about that pathway, I would say that we have a lot of openness and curiosity about that too, because I think the idea of the people we used to refer to as non-traditional students are becoming more and more like the norm. It's not so much an anomaly as just what our college populations look like overall. The part two of your question is now escaping me. Can you repeat it?
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
The second question was, if I remember correctly, the program worked until the student's second year in post-secondary.
Yep.
Where are the
Yep.
students transitioned to after that point?
Yep, got it. Right. So I think built into our post-secondary programming in particularly, our advisors work hard to build connections to campus-based resources. I think the idea is that we certainly know that our services are going to sunset. And so apart from sort of logistical, tactical support with renewing a FAFSA, clearing verification, securing an award letter, on-time bill pay, staying in line with SAP, your college's SAP policy, I think our advisors do a lot of coaching on how students can seek help and then take advantage of the resources that their campuses are offering. Part of that is because we know that building that connectivity to their campus is going to preserve the momentum that they have when they're in their first 2 years and being served by uAspire. Part of it is because uAspire does not work at your college. And so a lot of times your college, financial aid office, bursar is where you're just going to have to go to put into practice the recommendation uAspire is giving you. So I think we're building this connection to the campus, this sense of self-efficacy about help seeking and building up the students' language so that when they are seeking help, they feel comfortable and confident. So we're using some of the jargon that they're going to have to use. So in the latter half of our post-secondary programming, especially that last quarter of advising, our advisors do a lot of reminding the students that the services are going to sunset, checking on, do you know where to go for the following resources? So I wouldn't say it's a formal handoff back to the college, but there is a lot of intentional encouragement throughout the program to build that connection so that when we do start winding down our services to students, we confirm with them that they've picked up what we've been teaching them and they know where to go for help and that they feel comfortable and confident and connected and supported by their college.
Thank you.
Sure. Great question.
Hi, this is Sylvia from Arizona State University. We had two questions. First of all, just understanding in terms of the online advising or virtual advising, as you say, do you use a proprietary platform or a public, an open source platform, just to understand sort of what that experience is like for students? And then also, what does the caseload look like for your advisors?
Yeah, good questions. So we use Signalvine, the cloud-based platform, so not in-house proprietary. We've been working with Signalvine for most of our college, certainly all of our post-secondary advising, most of our high school advising where we've used virtual means for connecting with students. So Signalvine is SMS and MMS texting, so your basic, you can schedule messages to like large groups of students or segment them by specific subpopulations. So if I want to, for example, send a message to all of the uAspire students at Bunker Hill to remind them that their Bunker Hill fall bill is going to be due on July 20th. You can use the platform to sort of target those messages. It's kind of why the data integration with what the colleges have is so critical, because we can really personalize the message with the more data that we have about individual student needs. Otherwise, we will send out our curriculum to students, nudge their progress. Our advisors sort of jot everything down in case management notes in Salesforce, and we use those notes to segment, but it sort of, I think, allows us to be a bit more precise if we have data from the college. So Signalvine is the platform. The caseload varies. So we have our Massachusetts post-secondary advising program is our largest of our programs. It's got about 5,000 students, and so we have 4 full-time advisors and 1 part-time advisor. So folks have, I think, between 1,500 and 2,000 students. We don't spread them out evenly because we try to cluster by campus, and so it makes for a bit of an uneven spread. But that's roughly the range. Our New York City program has about 5,000 students in it, and we had 2 full-time advisors last year. And so we really went intentional with clustering the students, and we did all of the students most of the students attend a CUNY campus. So of the 5,000, 1 advisor had about 3,000 of the students, and the other advisor had closer to 1,500. She had, the SUNYs and then all of the other colleges, in-state and also out-of-state. And then that other part-time person that was texting some students in Massachusetts was helping out with the New York program as well. So it varies. Our general rule of thumb is 1,250 to 1. We feel like that's about a good manageable caseload. We can keep tabs on our students, run the texting program with precision. We can do great case management notes and documentation that way, and really sort of leverage an advisor's capacity with a lot of intention. But I think it depends a bit on the partner, the spread of the students, and some of the more, program-specific nuances.
Just to add a little bit of kind of variation on some of that, on the College Forward model, because we kind of segment our programming similarly into place-based versus virtual. And so I mean, my 2 cents is that if you're able to, I think there's value in both of these approaches. If you have a low-cost and sustainable method to do that on a physical campus or an institution, that's always, a great tiered level of support to bake into the equation. That's where we started in our pay for success work with colleges, was having boots on the ground. But we've also realized that being able to marry that with lower cost, text nudging and then virtual advising, doing Skype calls or FaceTime sessions with students, and all tracking that can augment the great work that's often just obviously more expensive to have lower ratios of advisors or coaches is what we call our folks who are place-based. So our place-based coaches, because it was more relationship-driven, the institutions were a little bit smaller, were able to get to the entire freshman class, which is about 5 full-time employees. who are doing that work. And they had much smaller caseloads, between about 100 and 150, depending on their risk assessment of that caseload. But again, with some of the virtual support, if you can layer that in, you can obviously do things much more efficiently. So finding that balance as you're thinking about program design or potential service providers, people who have that sophistication, I think is critical. Understand that the differences of how to do case management across a very diverse set of students.
This is Brett from Ohio. You both kind of suggested this in some different ways, but I want to try to get at system change. If I take a step back and we can talk about retention rates at schools being low, especially for specific populations, and it makes sense that your interventions would help that. But question that I have gets to the low rates suggest systemic challenges. And so uAspire has policy change, College Forward, some of the staff were picked up. I'm trying to think through, do you all have other kind of broader theories of change about how to affect the systems that would result in long-term outcomes? So if we're thinking about kind of a pay-for-success model, there's the intervention, but at some point, does it want to incorporate where the systems absorb and make lasting improvements?
I feel like we could have a whole afternoon webinar on this section. I know Michelle and I probably have limitless thoughts about that, and I think that there's the capital P policy and the lowercase p policy that's more institutionally specific. That is something that's part of our work with our college partners. I was doing in the background, engaging with senior leadership. There are a lot of just bad policies that have been around for 40 years and have pretty much no reason for being there. And so they might just go unnoticed, but they can be, things like a graduation fee at a college where students are having this $250 bill just to get their diploma was baked into their financial aid package. That can be enough of a barrier, literally, to knock a student off path, as y'all may have seen in your own experience. So making those sorts of requirements, we were able to get that removed and just frank conversations with their leadership. So I think that there's some of those opportunities that'll be very institutionally specific. If we're talking about undoing a lot of bad capital P policies that relates to higher ed, I think we both have a laundry list of issues. In Texas, just one specific theme related to pay for success is we don't have outcomes-based funding in Texas, period. We have little tiny fractions of that in terms of how colleges are financially incentivized or penalized, and none of it has to do, of any substance, has to do with performance in terms of their persistence and graduation rates. When we met with the CFO of one of our college partners, he said that he could not make an economic case as to why it was in their best interest to retain their freshman to sophomore year as opposed to recruiting a whole new crop of high school seniors. So when you're talking about systemic issues, and I think, yes, I think we have to hit this from multiple angles, the service side, but as you have those opportunities to be engaged in those discussions or pulled into them or pushing yourselves into them, if you can do all of it, I think that's where the real enduring change happens. But it's hard, and it's regional, and in some cases it's institutional.
Great.
Yes, ditto on all of that. Thank you, Austin. That was really well said. I think that the campus-specific component is really important because I think, I know we're right at time, so I'll be really brief. I think we have in our policy and systems change work, specifically where it comes to like award letter, right? That's where we've had a lot of recent successes. And I think it's proven to us the power of, you can go in and start almost like taking an economist approach and start changing these like small structures and see what the impact is on a systemic level. And those opportunities are sort of very, very regional and very campus specific, but they're there. And I think that that's part of what's exciting about a partnership is that you can, that's part of the learning that you do when you're working together. And I think you can be really creative and opportunistic and really precise as well.
Thank you so much, Michelle and Austin, for your thoughtful answers. And like I said, this is just the beginning of the conversation. Both uAspire and College Forward will be in attendance at NCAN, so definitely see some opportunities for our cohort sites to continue asking them questions and continue the conversation there. I will send out these slides later today, and just wanted to thank you both today. And here's their contact information as well if you'd like to reach out to them offline and continue the conversation. Thank you all so much for attending, and have a great afternoon or rest of your day, depending on where you are in the country.
Thank you, everyone.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Take care.